Thank you all for coming. I'm not really sure where to start in terms of the work. Obviously, before you have heads on plinths, gold heads on plinths. It's quite an academic mode of display, something you might see in the National Portrait Gallery or the British Museum. And yet there's something unfamiliar about it. There's something which strikes you as different. There's something which you think, have I seen this before? And the answer is probably not in the UK at least. Essentially, I started working with ideas around empathy and about perception and about how one individual can try and experience or enter into the sort of the internal state of another person. So yeah, empathy. And I didn't realise at the time, but it was actually quite a personal story I was trying to engage with and trying to decipher. So I was trying to decipher my own experiences. Growing up in London, like kind of around the 80s, 90s, mixed race guy, trying to understand the way that people looked at me, because I basically grew up between London and Hampshire. And how people looked at me in Hampshire as opposed to how people looked at me in London. Very different, by the way.
I get that.
Very different, but it was an unspoken thing. I was brought up by my mother, she's white, and it was a very unspoken thing, so I was sort of left to navigate this sort of social terrain without any real guiding force, and that sort of made me a bit of sort of went into my internal world, I guess, and would respond very much to the small cues in people. You know, what does the eyebrow mean? What's that shift? Why someone slowed down? Why is this sort of expectation of me different? And that led to a series of, when I went to art school, that led to a series of sort of abstract video works which kind of concentrated on subliminal messages. So I was trying to literally kind of sound waves, light waves, and messages that would flash up and be in the under sound score. To try and basically put in bits of information, a bit like the press do, a bit like, you know, when the press give bits of information about, depending on the story, they will skew the descriptions to fit their narrative and to fit, you know, the way they sell their product. I would try in these pieces, the abstract pieces, the video pieces, to just sort of put the beginnings of suggestion of who these people are. I then progressed to, or moved towards, basically doing stop motion animation. I realised that empathy, how do we recognise someone? Well, there's a site of communication, it's called the face. It was glaringly obvious, but when I actually found it completely changed my work and took me from someone who had no training in modelling, you know, making things out of clay, making things look like things. I had no interest in that really before. I found that through these stop motion animations I was able to essentially expand time. So I'd expand time, I was able to analyse the nuances, how someone's eye moves and how that connected to a certain part of the brain. And so it's a way to sort of determine how someone's thinking and then giving a sort of an inkling to what they might be thinking. And with the understanding that it's always the sort of subjective perception, which goes back to the beginning of where I started with the work. I then went into experimenting with physiognomy, so how changing facial proportions, how changing a little, you know, kind of where an eye goes, or the shape of an eye, a slope of the forehead, the size of the forehead, where the ears are, how much they go out. What effect does that have on the viewers? You know, it was a pseudoscience, well documented. I forget the dates, but you know, it's people would be institutionalized based on particular measurements, which goes back to sort of the categorizing the documentation of different peoples throughout the world by colonizing entities, like, you know, Britain, for example. Now, that wasn't something I was necessarily engaged with in terms of the colonial aspect, but I was very much interested in the personal and the social, so what we're dealing with today. That led me to all these different experiments, which were initially for the animations, they're called the stop motion animations. And it wasn't until I was in the Royal College of Art where I was studying that a tutor sort of challenged me, and she was asking me, well, why don't you show these studies, as you call them? I said, don't be silly, you know, it's just for me. But I then went ahead and showed the first head, which is a very small scale, white plaster head. Now, scale has played a huge part in my work because as well as the physiognomy and the internal, the subjective. I'm trying to deal with the idea of monumentality, basically critiquing monumental sculpture and looking at how society chooses who it represents and who it chooses to represent itself. Because I feel that the representations of, and I use black men as a sort of microcosm, because the representations of black men in the UK, and I think in the US it's very similar, is less than flattering. And it's very, very prescribed. If you're going to be a success, you're allowed to be a success in a very particular way, with very particular avenues. And so probably a very important thing to mention about these pieces is that they're not subjects. I thought what Kenny was saying about tapping people on the shoulder and letting them choose how they present themselves was absolutely fascinating. Because I chose a different method, which was to make people up. So instead of someone earning the right or the accolade of having their portrait done, I was going to make people up based on physiognomy, based on subjective understandings of how people respond to facial cues and types, to present almost like experiments in the idea of perception, to present amalgamations, composited people who represent a sort of a social understanding, sort of a social undercurrent of how we see particular people. And again, I say I've used what I understand. I've used things that I feel are authentic to me as a way to try and engage in the most effective way, the most kind of powerful way possible with the viewer. So if I believe it, then it's going to be manifested in the piece, and that's going to hopefully translate itself to the experience the viewer has. And that's why I've used male characters up until this point. I'm currently working now on female characters, because I feel like I've caught up to the stage where I know what this work's about a bit more, and I feel able to sort of use them in a very effective way, which adds to, as opposed to just sort of, just for the sake of it. I said scale is very important, because here we have, I should say scale is very important, but also the mode of display. So what they are. Material is incredibly important in my work. We have got quartzite plinth for these particular pieces. They're on Italian slate. I say the heads themselves are made up. These ones use a digital method. So I've used 3D software to make the first sort of sculptures, the first composites, because it's allowed me to go down many, many different avenues. So when I would sculpt in clay, it's a very linear process. So you basically have to choose and just go with it. You can't really compare different versions of people. So the computer has allowed me to make many different comparisons to get more specific. I then cast them, mold them, cast them in a oil-based clay, resculpt them, mold them again, and then these ones are actually a composite material. They're aluminium and resin, because again, I'm trying to connect sort of a lineage, ancient meets contemporary. So you've got quartzite, Italian slate, and then you've got aluminium and polyurethane composite, but which using digital technique to actually make the initial sculpt. But then you have it using gilding technique, which is, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of years old. By using gold leaf, which is then laid on a substrate, on a glue substrate, which gives you like this very polished effect, which you can imagine almost like in a temple or in a, I don't know, some sort of Egyptian thing. So I'm trying to connect the contemporary to an ancient thing, which is also used by states, by nations to impart sort of monumentality to these works, important as status. So they're made up people, yet they have status. They have intrinsic value, not as objects, but as ideas of someone, of people, of a consciousness. And I've got, I should say, because Stella's here, I also have a sort of a different version of this sort of way of working with heads, particularly as a site of communication and as attached as a link to history, to how history is being adapted by those in power. And in the square mile in the city, I have some large aluminium heads or marble plinths, which are far more reduced. They're a lot more stylized to look a bit more like Egyptian sort of sculptures. So I try and tap into different sort of modes of presenting power, essentially.
Great.